I remember the way he used to look at me when we built something out of nothing, when we were two caffeine-fueled minds chasing an idea we believed could change everything. Nathan Blackwell, my husband, my partner, my greatest mistake. The day we signed the first incorporation papers, he kissed my forehead and said, "We build this together or not at all." Back then, I believed him. Back then, I still believed in promises. We launched Brightcore Innovations out of a cramped garage with a busted heater and a shared dream. He had the numbers, I had the science. I wrote the prototype for our core platform code that could predict critical medical supply shortages across hospitals with nearly 90% accuracy. It was elegant, efficient. My signature was buried deep in every algorithm, even if no one saw it. For a while, we were unstoppable. But the thing about building empires is that people always forget who laid the bricks when the marble floors are finished. The first crack appeared on our third anniversary. It wasn't loud, just subtle. He started leaving meetings early, started smiling too much at our head of PR, started talking about positioning and image as if I were a liability instead of his co-founder. I chalked it up to stress, scaling pressure, growing pains. I should have known better, but I didn't. I still slept next to the man plotting my erasure. One cold Thursday morning, I walked into our boardroom and found my chair gone. Not moved, gone. In its place was a guest chair lower than the others, symbolic, intentional. Nathan's smile when I walked in was hollow, like a performance halfway through its final act. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing to the chair, like he was doing me a favor. Then came the papers. Divorce. Legal accusations of misappropriation of funds. Claimed I funneled company money to my private account. The irony, that account was set up by our shared financial advisor, the same one Nathan had lunch with weekly. I didn't cry. Not then. I read every word in silence. The betrayal wasn't just legal. It was surgical. Calculated. He hadn't just wanted to leave me. He wanted to destroy me and come out looking like the hero. And he almost did. At the first court hearing, I walked in wearing the same black suit I wore to our Series B funding pitch, except this time no one clapped when I spoke. Nathan sat across the aisle, flanked by three lawyers in $1,000 suits. One of them, Richard Klein, used to mentor me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's how I knew I'd already lost the narrative. They didn't just attack my character, they dissected it. Emails were taken out of context, financial transactions twisted into damning evidence. The judge barely looked at me. He didn't need to. Nathan had built his argument like a perfect machine, clean, cold, and convincingly cruel. When my voice cracked trying to explain a transaction I had authorized months ago for back-end research, Nathan's attorney said, "So you're admitting mismanagement under oath?" I looked at Nathan. His expression didn't move. The same face that had once whispered, "You're brilliant," was now weaponizing my genius against me. They made me sign a provisional agreement that day to minimize media impact. They framed it like a temporary measure, a compromise. I would step down from the company until the court ruled on full ownership. I should have refused. But in that moment, surrounded by polished lies and expensive lawyers, all I could feel was heat behind my eyes and the pounding of blood in my ears. I signed. And in doing so, I handed over everything I had built. I wasn't escorted out. I wasn't even acknowledged. I simply stood up, walked past a room full of men pretending I had never mattered, and stepped into a winter afternoon that felt 20 degrees colder than it should have. That night, I lay on the floor of my one-bedroom apartment, staring at the ceiling, and tried to remember how we got here, how love turned into litigation, how the man who once traced my spine with the tenderness of a sculptor now filed affidavits against me like I was a stain on his legacy. I had no answers, but I had silence. And in that silence, something began to bloom, not rage, not revenge, not yet, but a stillness, a realization. They'd taken my company, my name, and soon they'd try to take my reputation. But I was still breathing. And I still remembered the code. No one else did. Because while Nathan handled the suits and I handled the soul, I was the one who encrypted the first full build. I was the one who spent 36 hours straight debugging the back-end pipeline. I was the one who buried a digital fingerprint inside every line my fingerprint. That night I opened my laptop. The screen flickered on like a pulse awakening from coma. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I wrote. I read. I researched. Because if Nathan wanted a war in court, he would get one. But not now. No, now I disappear. Let them believe they've won. Let them boast in boardrooms and toast champagne over my ashes. Let them lower their guard. Because I wasn't going to fight back in their arena on their terms. I was going to build my own, and when I returned, it wouldn't be for vengeance. It would be for silence. The kind that falls over a courtroom when the truth is finally, irrevocably, undeniably heard. I thought betrayal would feel like fire, like rage, like breaking glass or clenched fists pounding against the injustice of it all. But it didn't. It felt like silence. Not peaceful, not still, but heavy, suffocating. Like being buried alive in a soundproof box, screaming with no one to hear you. When the judge handed down the temporary injunction against me, I didn't blink. Not when he called me negligent. Not when he questioned my emotional stability. Not even when he said my continued involvement posed a threat to the integrity of Brightcore. He was quoting Nathan, word for word. I recognized the phrasing. I'd edited his speeches for years. My lawyer, if you could even call her that, muttered something about filing an appeal. She was late to our prep session that morning. She didn't even remember my middle name. They didn't just take my company. They made me look like I deserved to lose it. That afternoon, my inbox was flooded with cold apologies. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. We're grateful for your early contributions. This transition will allow the company to flourish, as if I was some intern being quietly phased out instead of the damn architect of the empire. And Nathan. He held a press conference, wore his navy suit, cuffed his sleeves just enough to show the luxury watch I gave him the night we closed our first big funding round. He stood in front of a custom backdrop with the Brightcore logo and talked about moving forward, about protecting the mission, about difficult decisions. He never said my name, not once. That was the plan all along, erase me. Not destroy me in one blow, but sand me down until I disappeared. And it was working. Over the next few weeks, articles popped up: co-founder steps down amid financial concerns. Nathan Blackwell restructures for growth. Trouble at Brightcore sources say no. I became a rumor, a whisper, a footnote. And inside, I was collapsing. I sold my car, canceled every subscription, moved into a studio apartment with thin walls and no heat. I couldn't afford coffee, so I sipped hot water and pretended every day. I'd walk to the public library, log on to one of the old terminals, and read, not news, not gossip, law. I didn't understand why the judge ruled the way he did. I needed to. So I started with civil procedure, moved on to contract law, then corporate fraud, then torts, then digital ownership statutes. I devoured it like a woman starving. Because I was not just for justice, for clarity. I learned about shell companies, about intellectual property traps, about how lawyers weaponize timelines, how NDAs are written to bind and blind, and how amicable settlements are where the guilty bury the truth. 3 months in, I found the clause, buried in our original partnership agreement. One line forgotten, untested. In the event of founder separation, all proprietary code contributions remain jointly owned unless legally waived. I never waived, because Nathan never asked, because he assumed, as always, that I wouldn't notice. But I did. The code was mine. The soul of Brightcore, the thing that made our product viable, valuable, and untouchable, was still tethered to my name. It wasn't enough to win a lawsuit, not yet, but it was enough to build a plan, so I made one. It started with reconnection, quiet, careful, targeted. I reached out to Chloe, the data analyst Nathan fired when she got pregnant. She answered on the first ring, said she'd been waiting for my call. Then Marcus, our ex-CTO, who quit after a heated ethics argument with Nathan. He invited me to dinner and brought printouts, receipts, emails, notes I didn't know he kept. Then Sonia, our HR director. Then Derek, our former marketing head. Bit by bit, piece by piece, I assembled a mosaic of the empire Nathan ruled and every crack in its foundation. They weren't just allies, they were witnesses. But I didn't need them to speak. I just needed them to remember. I filed no lawsuits, made no threats, didn't give the press a single quote. My silence became armor, my calm, a weapon, because the more Nathan believed I was broken, the more reckless he became. He started reshuffling leadership, cut corners and product updates, quietly funneled funds into personal accounts just enough to fly under regulatory radar. But I noticed everything. I documented it all, compiled a timeline, labeled every transaction, dated every breach of fiduciary duty. I kept it in a folder named Restoration, tucked inside a drive that never connected to the internet. But still, I waited. Because to win in court, you need more than the truth. You need timing. And Nathan was about to give me the perfect window. 6 months after my injunction, Brightcore announced a corporate restructuring to prepare for acquisition, a $200 million valuation on the table, a legacy deal as they called it. The kind of transaction that required audited code authentication, IP disclosures, founder history, and legal clearance, which meant they had to come back to me. The request came in the form of an email from a junior counsel. Dear Ms. Clark, they use my maiden name. I noticed in accordance with Clause 9A of the Founder Agreement, we request your formal waiver of ownership pertaining to source code segments X1, X17. They attached a pre-written signature page, no compensation, no negotiation, just expectation, as if I were still the woman who sat in a courtroom and said nothing while they dismantled my life. I stared at the screen for a long time, then I smiled, because they had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I printed the email, added it to the restoration file, and called a number I hadn't dialed in years, Claire Hawthorne, the one lawyer who had believed me when no one else did. She left her firm 3 years ago, said she was tired of defending monsters. When I told her everything, she didn't gasp. She didn't even blink. She just said, "Tell me where to start." That's when I knew. I was no longer the victim in someone else's story. I was the storm forming quietly over the ocean. And, soon, the thunder would come. They think silence is weakness, but silence is strategy. People forget that the most dangerous moves aren't made on a battlefield. They're made in boardrooms, in inboxes, behind closed doors where the right signature on the wrong document can become a dagger pointed at an empire's throat. Nathan taught me that, and I listened more carefully than he ever imagined. After Claire agreed to take the case, didn't file anything, no press, no subpoenas, no court drama. We let the air stay still, just long enough for Nathan to breathe comfortably in it, because predators don't check the grass for danger when they believe they're the lion. We built slowly, quietly. I spent days reviewing old contracts, hours annotating transcripts from board meetings, and nights staring at the lines of code I had written once by moonlight, now dissecting them as if they were crime scene evidence. Which, in a way, they were. Each line was a breadcrumb back to me. Every semicolon, every annotation, bore my voice, even if no one had recognized it at the time. But now, the time had come to turn my signature into a sword. Claire filed our first silent move through a holding company, Mira Equity Partners. No ties to me, no online trail. A ghost firm with just enough teeth to bite into Brightcore's mid-level investors. One by one, Mira Equity made offers. Strategic, clean, generous enough to feel irresistible, especially to those who were growing uncomfortable under Nathan's increasingly erratic leadership. By the end of month 3, Mira owned 18% of Brightcore. By month 5, 29%. That's when we made the next move. We approached Eleanor Wu, a board member, and one of the few people in that ivory tower I actually respected. She'd always been wary of Nathan's rise. She'd voted against the injunction in silence. Now, we gave her a reason to speak. Eleanor didn't ask why I was back. She just looked me in the eyes and said, "It's about time." She brokered a private meeting between Mira Equity and the internal compliance team. We didn't accuse Nathan of fraud. We didn't have to. We simply asked for a full audit of intellectual property provenance. That's when the real unraveling began. Because the moment Brightcore's legal team tried to prove full ownership of my code, they hit a wall, my wall. The embedded fingerprint I left behind wasn't just symbolic, it was time-stamped, hashed, and verified under blockchain protocols we had implemented during development me, personally. That meant there was a cryptographic trail no one could erase. Not even Nathan. Their CTO tried to dance around it, claimed joint authorship, claimed I had verbally agreed to IP reassignment. But digital truth doesn't care about your narrative. It only cares about proof. And the proof was screaming through the silence. Meanwhile, Nathan remained oblivious. He was prepping for the acquisition announcement, planning to unveil the deal at the Brightcore Winter Gala. Press invites had already gone out, champagne ordered, venue booked. He thought he was celebrating a legacy. He didn't realize he was standing on its grave. I received the invitation by email. Probably automated, probably sent by an intern who had no idea what they'd done. It was poetic, in a cruel kind of way. Because the gala was scheduled at the exact same venue where we held our engagement party 7 years ago. Back then, he had toasted to forever. Now, he would be toasting to his final hour. Claire and I sat down 2 days before the gala and reviewed our full arsenal. The audit had revealed inconsistencies, large ones, payments rerouted through dormant accounts, bonus disbursements with no board approval, signatures forged on internal memos, everything we needed. But I told Claire not to file. Not yet. I didn't want to win behind closed doors. I wanted the truth to echo, loudly. So I picked my outfit carefully, simple, black, Not as a costume of mourning, but as a mirror so Nathan would see, every time he looked my way, the shadow he created with his own hands. I arrived at the gala precisely at 800 p.m. No one recognized me at first. The staff didn't blink. The photographers didn't notice. I slipped between donors, execs, and tech influencers like a ghost returned from the past they tried to bury. Then his eyes found me. Nathan froze mid-conversation. His smile faltered for the briefest second before snapping back into place. Performers always reset their masks quickly. "Claire," he said as my lawyer approached behind me, "didn't expect to see you tonight." "You should have," she said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. We didn't need to cause a scene. The real show was waiting on stage. At 9:30, Nathan took the mic. He thanked the team. He talked about resilience, vision, integrity. He painted himself as the lone shepherd of a billion-dollar dream. And then, just as he lifted his glass for the final toast, Claire walked up to the platform and handed him a manila folder, publicly, in full view of every guest. Nathan opened it. At first, he just skimmed. Then his brows pinched, his grip tightened, his mouth parted slightly as he realized what was inside. A notarized affidavit detailing the forged memos, the forensic audit linking the accounts, a statement from the original IP ledger proving I still owned the code, and finally, an injunction request prepared for court the following morning. The room had gone dead silent. He looked at me. For the first time in years, he truly saw me, and I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply stared back, because this wasn't revenge. This was correction. Claire leaned in and whispered something. I couldn't hear it. But I saw Nathan's face crumble. Then the mic screeched. He stepped back. No speech, no defense, just silence. That's when I walked out, because my work there was done. The empire he built with my bones had been reclaimed, not with a scream, but with a whisper so sharp it cut through glass. The next morning, Nathan didn't show up to court. His lawyer did. Alone, eyes hollow, tie crooked, carrying a briefcase like it weighed more than truth ever should. Claire and I sat side by side on the cold wooden bench of Courtroom B12, the same courtroom where I had once stood like a ghost while my life was disassembled methodically, mercilessly. I had bled silently in this very room, my voice swallowed by protocol, my dignity signed away in legalese. But now, the wind had shifted. Now they were the ones who would answer. The judge presiding wasn't the same one from my original hearing. That man had retired early, likely advised to step down quietly after an ethics review tied to a different case. Though we both knew the dominoes started falling the moment Claire filed her complaint to the Judicial Oversight Board. This new judge, Honorable Amelia Sloan, was razor sharp. Former federal prosecutor, no tolerance for theatrics, no patience for fraud. She read the brief, eyes darting left to right with machine-like efficiency. When she reached the exhibit's financial records, time-stamped code logs, Claire's audit trail, she raised an eyebrow. Then she looked up and said one thing I assume the defendant understands the weight of these accusations, Nathan's lawyer, a man who had once boasted he could bury bodies with paperwork, swallowed visibly. We're requesting a delay, Your Honor. Judge Sloan didn't even blink. Request denied. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because power, real power, doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives in whispers and shatters worlds with stillness. That afternoon, the injunction was granted. All transactions involving Brightcore were frozen pending investigation. All assets linked to the disputed IP were suspended. And per the founder agreement Nathan had foolishly left untouched. I was reinstated as co-owner with voting power intact. The company was no longer his alone. And soon, it wouldn't be his at all. News broke within the hour. Tech founder faces legal setback. Amid IP dispute, Brightcore Gala turns sour after court filing. Whistleblower co-founder returns with receipts. I wasn't named directly in the first few waves. The media was cautious. But the image of Nathan's pale face, holding that manila folder at the gala, told the public everything they needed to know. And I wasn't hiding anymore. I gave one interview. One. I sat across from journalist Mara Levin, a woman known for slicing through PR spin like it was tissue paper. Her opening line was simple. Why now I stared at the lens, and for the first time, I spoke. My name was erased, my voice was silenced, my future was stolen, but I never disappeared. I waited because justice isn't loud, it's patient. And I wanted the truth to have a stage bigger than the lie ever did. That interview went viral, not because I wept, not because I screamed, but because I was calm, collected, and undeniable. Within a week, Brightcore's board called an emergency meeting. Technically, I wasn't required to attend in person, but I did anyway. I walked into that glass conference room like a storm in human form cloaked in black, eyes steady, voice quiet. Nathan was already seated, no tie, no smile. A shell of the man who once stood on stage proclaiming himself a visionary. I took my seat at the table, not across from him, beside him, where I had always belonged, where he had tried so hard to erase me from. Eleanor Wu, now acting chair, opened the floor. Before we begin, Ms. Clark, do you have anything you'd like to say? I looked around, 12 faces, 12 decision makers. Most of them had voted me out. Most of them had watched me burn without asking where the smoke came from. I'm not here to make a speech, I said. I'm here to restore balance. I laid out my proposal. Clear, legal, bulletproof. Nathan would resign. All shares acquired post-injunction would be revoked under bad faith acquisition statutes. His private accounts tied to Brightcore would be audited and, if necessary, surrendered. And I wasn't asking for vengeance. I was taking ownership. But not just of the company, of the narrative, of the legacy, of every ounce of value I had poured into a machine he tried to claim as his own. No one spoke, until Eleanor finally said, "Is that acceptable to the board?" The votes came in. 10 yes, 1 abstain, and Nathan, he didn't vote. He stood, slipped off the watch I gave him years ago, placed it on the table like it meant something, and walked out. No words. Just the sound of footsteps that echoed far too loudly in a room that once silenced me. I didn't cry. I didn't toast. I didn't even linger. I left the room and walked out into the winter air. The same bitter cold that had once made my bones ache with grief. But this time, it felt different. This time, I didn't feel small. I felt clean, weightless, like someone who had not only survived the storm, but had learned how to shape it. That night, Claire sent me a message, just one line. "The courtroom is yours now," but I wasn't finished yet. Because justice without acknowledgement is just a well-decorated lie. So I requested one final hearing, not to seek retribution, but to speak on the record. The hearing was procedural, just a formality. But when I stood before Judge Sloan to finalize the ownership transfer, she paused. "You've been remarkably composed through all of this," she said. I nodded, because pain taught me that rage burns out. But clarity sharpens. She tapped her gavel once, slow and deliberate. "Ms. Clark, you've redefined what justice looks like in this courtroom. And for the first time since this war began, I felt it. Closure, not because I won, but because I never let them turn me into what they hoped I'd become." The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Not in temperature, but in memory. This place had once devoured me whole, turned me from a name on a plaque to a footnote in a case file. Years ago, I had walked into this very room with trembling hands, clutching my truth like a fragile flame, and they had snuffed it out with rules, with bias, with apathy. But now I didn't shake. Now I didn't flinch. Now I stood before the court as the architect of the truth they once refused to hear. This wasn't about Nathan anymore. He had become irrelevant the moment he walked out of that boardroom and left his empire behind like a defeated king stepping off a crumbling throne. This was about the system, about the judge who had once dismissed my voice with a wave of the hand, about the lawyers who didn't read my name but read the headlines, about every person who chose convenience over clarity. So I filed for the hearing, voluntarily, a statement of record. I didn't need the court's permission anymore, but I needed its silence to break. The room was half full. Press in the back, associates whispering, the usual legal ritual unfolding, unaware of what was about to happen. Judge Amelia Sloan entered, and the room rose. She looked at me once, and something flickered behind her eyes, recognition. Perhaps, or restraint. "Miss Clark," she said, scanning the docket. "You've requested a final statement before the court as part of the resolution process. While it's not required, I'm allowing it." I nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." I stepped forward, and I didn't read from a paper. I didn't carry notes, because every word was carved into me. I once believed that truth was enough. I began, "That facts, when presented cleanly and calmly, would triumph over fiction. That character mattered. That intentions mattered. I paused. But what I learned in this courtroom is that silence often speaks louder than justice. That money can buy narrative. That connections can weigh heavier than truth. No one moved, not a cough, not a breath. I was erased here, I said, looking at the bench, in this very room. I stood where I'm standing now and told the truth, and no one listened. I turned, slowly, letting let the words land. I was called unstable, negligent, dangerous. I was stripped of my title, my company, my dignity, and all of it, sanctioned with a stamp that said, legal. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need volume. I had something sharper composure. But I didn't vanish. I didn't crumble. I studied. I documented. I rebuilt not out of revenge, but out of principle. Because if the law can't protect the innocent, then it must at least answer to them. I stepped closer to the bench. And now, I reclaim my voice, not with rage, not with violence, but with evidence, with patience, with precision. I paused. And then I said the line I had rehearsed 1,000 times in the quiet. You taught me that justice isn't given, it's constructed. I could see it then, the shift, Judge Sloane's hands, resting atop the file, tightened just slightly. Her eyes flickered not with guilt, but with something far more rare in that room, grief. Grief for what had been allowed to happen, like grief for what had been overlooked in the name of order. She straightened her posture and asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to place on the record?" I hesitated. Then I reached into my folder and removed a single photograph. It was old, slightly worn at the edges, me and Nathan, early days of Bright Core, sitting, cross-legged on the garage floor, whiteboards behind us, laptops on our knees, smiles wide, hope unbroken. This, I said, holding it up, was the beginning, and then I placed a second image beside it, taken just 2 weeks ago, me in the Bright Core boardroom, standing where Nathan once stood, surrounded by a new leadership team, inclusive, ethical, relentless. And this, I continued, is the correction. The judge didn't speak for a long moment, and when she finally did, her voice was lower. Ms. Clark, on behalf of the court, I extend an apology. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was real, a ripple in the fabric of indifference. She cleared her throat, composed herself, and added, "Your record will reflect not only your ownership, but your integrity and your resilience." She raised the gavel. "One final note for the court," she said. "Let this case serve as a reminder that truth delayed is not truth denied, and that even silence, when broken with precision, can become the sharpest force in the pursuit of justice." The gavel came down, and I swear to you, homie, there were tears in her eyes, not many, just enough. Enough to let me know that I hadn't just won, I had been heard. I walked out of that courtroom into a waiting world. The wind greeted me not as an enemy, but as an old friend. It danced around me like it remembered who I was, like it had missed me. I didn't make a statement to the press. I didn't wave. I just walked. Through the noise, through the questions, through the cameras. I walked past it all and into the life I rebuilt from ashes. And for the first time since Nathan tried to rewrite my story, I was finally the author again.